Okay, I don't know what that was. Welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast, everybody. Episode 119. Little chaos coming at you. From my 65 LG. Regular listeners understand the meaning of this guitar. This is a comfort guitar. It's been all over the world with the members of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. This was my bus guitar. It used to stay in the bunk with me, and then folks would borrow it from time to time. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about what's at hand. Welcome. All right, so I've been doing these kind of guitar ramble things for a few nights, but then people complain and they just want the regular podcast. So sometimes I'd rather just talk and play guitar. But I'll put it down. We should think about what Donald Trump has been saying, though. You know, the fascism. The wishing he had generals like Hitler. I need some generals like Hitler had. I mean, that guy's not fit to be anywhere near the Oval Office. He wasn't the first time. The fact that he still has such a sway over the American people, such a hold over them, is, you know, it's beyond the pale. It's disgusting. And if you're like me, you're disgusted. You're ready to flush this 9 years down the toilet. The amount of progress that we've lost because of one man, because of one corrupt family who's now been infused with big cash, you know, so it's brought all the crazy people out of the woodworks, you know, the Elon Musks and Harlan Crows. You know, Harlan Crow is the big donor who backs Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society and pays all of Clarence Thomas's bills and his mama's bills, you know, and his nephew's tuition and God knows what else we don't even know about, trips all over the world. And, you know, that's a guy who collects Nazi memorabilia. He had, like, Hitler's place settings at his table. He has a sculpture garden with, like, Ceausescu and all the world's, like, worst tyrants in a garden. You know, he's got a garden of tyranny. Like, these are crazy, crazy people. They're people with more money than any sense. And the fact that they're backing a candidate, they're backing a guy who's praising Hitler. You know, you can't be an American president and praise Hitler unless you're a bad actor. And Trump's a bad actor. And he's going to do a rally this weekend at the Garden on Sunday. He's going to replicate the America First rally that his father attended back in the 30s. I don't remember exactly the year. In the era of fascism over in Germany, which was heavily influenced by American, you know, Father Coughlin and Harold or Henry Ford. And, you know, there was a lot of people. Yorkville, I lived on the Upper East Side for a long time. Yorkville was a neighborhood where they had all kinds of pro-Nazi gatherings and stuff. And it's just the fact that this is even in the conversation, the fact that a guy is openly running on like, yeah, I'm a fascist, it is terrifying, because I know how many people that will appeal to. I know the caliber of human being that is still voting for Trump at this point. And that should terrify me. It should it does terrify me. It should terrify you. If you grew up in the white suburban, you know, America that I did for at least part of my childhood, you understand how casually people do talk about Hitler, how casually they make anti-Semitic and Holocaust jokes. It all dovetails together. They do it with with the ease at which they were racist. And this country was very racist for a long time. People said very racist things behind closed doors in white, rural, and suburban America. They just did. And anybody who doesn't believe that isn't being honest or hasn't had enough exposure. And that's not to say that everybody's racist. It's to say that the ignorance that we've allowed to manifest for so long in this country that we didn't clean up, a character defect that we didn't deal with, to use the terms of recovery, is now getting in our way. It's now tripping us up. And it's not just a broken shoelace at this point, right? It's not just a minor inconvenience that we're acting out upon. We've manifested a leader who is appealing to the worst instincts of the American people and running on a platform of fascism and being welcomed in that and being sort of coddled by the, by the media. He's being whitewashed and sane washed. They're not calling it exactly as it is. It should be horrifying. If you have even mildly studied history, let alone, there's no excuse for anybody ever praising Hitler or the Nazi Party or any of that shit, right? And you should know that stuff, dead to rights, because it wasn't that long ago. It was our grandparents' generation, if you're my age, and your great-grandparents if you're a little young, but, younger than me. But, it happened not long ago. I've toured all over Germany. I love German people. I love the culture now and stuff. But, when you're there and you have proximity to the evil that occurred, it's got a heavy psychic weight, right? It's not just something that happened 1,000 years ago that you're trying to comprehend. I remember crying a couple summers ago outside of the Anne Frank house. It's a museum now in Amsterdam, right next to the, canal there, and just taking a moment and going sitting on a bench by myself. It's always sold out. I couldn't even take the tour or get in, but I was just there, and I'd been there so many times before, or at least a few times before on my travels, and I just took a moment, and the horror kind of overwhelmed me, that not only what happened to her and millions of other children and their families like her, but what happened to a continent? It was held hostage by a madman. People suffered, and people either stood up to that and paid with their lives, or they went along with it, which is even worse for their own well-being. And that's what I fear the most in our country. I fear people looking the other way when buses come and start rounding up immigrants and saying, well, hey, don't speak out because, it'll be us next or whatever. They were in the country illegally. I fear that, and I fear sort of the latent meanness in part of the American psyche that Trump is appealing to, because he understands it. He understands these people because he is them. And if you've been around this sort of caliber, this level of sort of, banal evil, right? The evil of mediocrity takes on a greater thing, a greater sort of horror when lots of guys get together to do this. They egg each other on. If you've ever seen a riot or a fight in a school hallway and everybody sort of gets excited in a bad way, right? That's what Trump is appealing to, that sort of emotion. He knows about it, and that's why he's going to pack Madison Square Garden, because he knows that that's going to benefit him. Roiling up that sort of anger is going to be a final, sort of marching order to his troops. He knows he's not going to win New York, right? He's not doing it in New York because he's going to win the district. He's doing it because he wants the cops and firemen and people in the suburbs who are partial to that mentality to be on the lookout, to be on guard, to be on point to his message, because he's going to foment a hell of a lot of chaos 2 weeks from now. And he knows it. He's going to declare himself the winner, as I've said 1,000 times on this show in the last couple of years, and it's finally catching on out there. I'm glad to hear it repeated, because you have to be aware of the danger. And I'm not saying they got that from me. I'm saying anybody who's paying attention knows that's what he's going to do. He's telling you that's what he's going to do, and he'll immediately force a constitutional crisis upon us. So he's going to hope that what looks like the establishment in communities, especially around New York, because New York's the center of media, right? And New York is important. Even if he doesn't win it, it's sort of, it's one of the kind of one of the states where a lot of things get filtered through. It can be a sort of a bellwether in the national mood, right? So he knows people are going to protest in Manhattan. He knows people will take to the streets if he declares himself the winner, on Tuesday night, and we're not even done counting ballots in Pennsylvania for another day or two, or Arizona or something. So he's going to pull that stunt, and then he's going to hope that he can get authorities to go along with him, right? The sort of civic authority, the visual authority of what looks like suburban and small town America and big city police departments, right? New York City NYPD, which he's got in his back pocket. He always has, but those kind of guys cracking down on the leftists, on the immigrants, on the people out in the street causing chaos. It's the same playbook he used in 2020, and it works. It works on Upper East Side white people. I remember they were putting out like some kind of barricades or something ahead of the election in 2020, and I remember seeing somebody I've known for years on Facebook, privileged finance bro on the Upper East Side, being like, look, they're not putting up those barricades for the Trump voters, making casting an aspersion towards Antifa or progressive protesters or whatever you want to call it. It fit his narrative of like, we're the good guys, we weren't the ones causing the trouble, which is bullshit. If you looked at what happened in Minneapolis and all these places, I guarantee you had plants that went in there and started the fires and did the destruction and stuff. A lot of that happened in Portland. Chad Wolf was sending out unmarked vans full of, unidentified officers pulling people off the street. Those guys were also fomenting the chaos. They were instigating it because it played into Trump's narrative. And we all know that he said to General Milley he wanted to just shoot the protesters, right? He was in a meeting in the Oval Office, and he told the Joint Chiefs of Staff that he should open fire on American protesters using the military before he went and hid in the bunker himself because he's a coward. Think about that. Think about a guy who was willing to kill somebody's kid because he didn't like the fact that they were protesting, that they were standing up to systemic racism and obvious racial corruption in the police department. We all saw what happened to George Floyd. George Floyd, rest his soul, he was murdered in front of us by a smug asshole who looked like he did that sort of thing with impunity. What are you going to do? Stop me, right? So he's going to appeal to that same mentality after the election, and he's going to hope that the people who are the enforcers of MAGA and his, stop the steal mentality are going to crack heads on other people's kids who are going to stand up and say, no, we're not doing this. And quickly people will pull back and will say, hey, is it worth it? Let's just chill out. You know what I mean? You don't want your kid going in there and getting cracked over the head with a truncheon, right? So he's going to make some sort of show of violence, I think, to crack down and then hope that sort of people back off or just accept it, right? Because he's a guy who doesn't take no for an answer. We know that in his sexual predation, right? We know that I used to tell people on Twitter, his whole philosophy is fuck you, stop me. That's Trump. He's just obsessive. He won't, no, I won. Nope, doesn't matter. Nope, I'm the greatest businessman in the world. He's got 6 bankruptcies, and he's willing to go on TV and say he's a business genius and found a corporation, NBC, that would allow him to do it, right? Found corporate execs. You just heard a guy broke his anonymity or broke his NDA or whatever, a producer from The Apprentice, finally corroborated what I told you as a Celebrity Apprentice talent wrangler, that the guy knew nothing about business, that he was not this rich corporate dude. He was an idiot who could barely get through a single take. He admitted that, right? So, but Trump didn't let any of that stop him, right? And he took that lie and sort of foisted it on a nation that was at least, was full to a certain extent of people that are like, hey, there's the guy from TV. He's an outsider. He's a disruptor. He must be good at business because I've heard his name in rap songs and stuff and seen the casinos. So he's better than a DC insider or a bureaucrat, which is not true. Bureaucrats are what you want. You have a better economy now than you did in 2020 when Trump was in charge, you know? So this revisionist history of like the Trump era were the good old days is complete bullshit. He did inherit some economic upticks that came from President Obama's administration, and Obama picked Biden to get, as I said last week, to get big bipartisan stimulus packages through after the financial crash, right? In my lifetime, it's Democrats who were always cleaning up the mess of Republican economic policy, which always runs up the deficit, right? It always deregulates Wall Street, and it creates a lot of wealth for people at the top, but it doesn't trickle down, right? Reaganomics was bullshit. We know it doesn't trickle down, right? It rusts out states, right? It sends jobs and productions overseas and makes a few people really rich before it all comes crashing down. The same model is happening now, you know? But now the wealth is so unequal that you have billionaires that are like, let me get you in office so I can do whatever I want. Elon Musk will give himself the biggest tax break in history if Trump gets elected, and he knows it. You think he's walking around giving away $1 million a day because there isn't 1,000 times that amount on the line that he stands to gain if Trump gets elected? You don't think he'll be in charge of NASA, you know, or launching SpaceX rockets out of the Grand Canyon? He'll be doing whatever he wants. He's a madman who spends half his day on Twitter like railing against government regulations, who literally bought Twitter to help Trump get elected with KSA money, with Saudi Arabian money, you know. Musk helped Russia. He helped Putin. He shut down Starlinks when they were, you know, when Ukraine was going to do an attack in Crimea. And they shut it down. Elon Musk shut it down on the Kremlin's orders. This is during the war. This is a couple years ago. He was in a Paris hotel room, and he's taken calls from someone inside Russia and shut down the Starlinks that he'd given to Ukrainian troops, and they couldn't follow through with the mission because the drones or whatever were on the Wi-Fi. That's insane. That's a violation of the Logan Act, just like Trump last week bragging about talking to Netanyahu, who calls him up and says, what do you think I should do in Iran? And Trump says, do whatever you want, right? There's an ex-POTUS interfering in geopolitics with the point of view of a dumbass who doesn't understand the complexity, right? And just saying, do whatever you want. You got American presidents like, hold up, you know, don't just start World War III right now. You know, let's rein in Netanyahu. Trump's telling him to do whatever he wants because he knows it's his buddy and it's Kushner's buddy, and he's gonna let him do whatever he wants. You know, that's not how you conduct the business of the government. You know, what Putin wants, what Saudi Arabia wants, what Iran wants, what North Korea wants is a multipolar globe, right? Where a lot of regional powers have a lot of power in their region. China, you know, and a huge power, but it's different now. Right now, we're the big leader in the world in terms of democracy. We're sort of the big superpower. Russia no longer is, right? You have all these other sort of heirs to the throne, and if you break it up into a bunch of little fiefdoms, you don't have a big moral guy on the block saying you can't do that, right? You can do whatever you want in your theater of influence. And that's what men like Xi, that's what men like Putin, that's what they want, MBS. You know, they don't want NATO. They don't want a big UN, you know, making sure there's human rights happening everywhere. If you're Xi, you want to be able to use slave labor and not have anybody get involved in telling you what to do. You know, you want to just get your iPhones out there on the market, right? You want to go to Africa and continue to plunder a continent that's been abused by colonialism its entire history, right? Russians are doing that. You know, they're taking all the resources now. They're taking all the mines and stuff. That's going to continue around the world. South America, all these kind of places. You know, it's an age-old story, but it's ramping up, right? It's ramping up now because now you have so much chaos and so much unrest that people will fall prey to the strong man, right? They'll think like, I can't do anything about it in the moment. And that's what Trump's hoping for, right? He's hoping for that moment to just sort of wrest control of democracy back from the people. And he's doing it under the guise of like, I'm your retribution, I'm your warrior, I'm going to hook you up. He's not going to hook anybody up. It's certainly not the people who are voting for him, right? He's going to get his enemies list, and he's going to go after the people that he views, as not on his side, including people like John Kelly and, General Milley, which is just insane, right? Trump isn't fit to shine their shoes, nor is he of any veteran. And I don't even want to talk about the disgusting thing he said about, the Mexican-American soldier who was murdered brutally at Fort Hood, right? And he promised to pay for her funeral. And then when he got the bill and heard it was 60 grand, he said it doesn't cost 60 grand to bury an effing Mexican, right? That's Trump. That's the dude I know. He's a pig. He's the most disgusting, lack of empathy, lack of class, just racist scumbag you'll ever meet. You don't need me to keep telling you that. If you're listening to this show, you know that. If you have eyes and ears, you know that, right? But that's the guy on the ticket. That's the guy we're lining up to vote against in 2 weeks and already beginning in many states, right? But you got to really think about, how much of a threat is that guy? And he's a big threat, because he's got enough people behind him, and he's got enough of a lack of morality. He doesn't care. He would burn down the world rather than cede an inch, of what he not believes is right, because he doesn't believe anything is right. He's only out for himself, like a Putin or somebody else. But rather than concede, his compulsion, his desire for greed, he'd let untold people suffer, which is, Putin's the best example of that. The guy's just sending people as cannon fodder into a war, while he has got, giant houses all over Russia, and Russia has the GDP of less than Italy. Somebody, Rachel Maddow or somebody had a map, and it's stunning, Ghana has a higher GDP or something than Russia. It's crazy. That's not to disparage Ghana. I'm saying there was Guyana or something. There's a South African country on that list, South American rather. And you're like, God, they produce more than Russia does, right? Russia is not the superpower it once was, because they carved it up. And all these individual oligarchs, got power, right? So it looks like they got a lot of money, right? Because when they're balling in Monaco or buying a Trump Tower condo through an anonymous LLC, they got all the money in the world, and bad actors will do business with them. And that's what Trump was doing for 20 years. So to him, it looks attractive, is my point, right? He doesn't see it as oh, there's a guy who pillaged his nation, right? Which is the largest nation by landmass on the planet. They should have wealth, right? But a lot of the people have outhouses and stuff. People would be shocked at how little, the Russians have, how little their economy has generated for the people who live in the country, because that's what happens when you have a kleptocracy. And that's what will happen here. We've already seen how sort of degraded America has become. We have a great economy right now. Don't get it wrong. Our economy is the history of the world, or the envy of the world, rather. There's a lot of work to do, but any of the other Western nations would trade places with our economic numbers and forecasts right now. That's not my point. My point is there's clearly areas that have been neglected. There's clearly, infrastructure and cities that are in serious disrepair, in serious need of, rebuilding and refunding and revitalization. That's all over this country, right? And a lot of that, as I said earlier, is a result of Republican policies, and a changing world and globalization. And, it's a very complex, complicated thing. And here's a guy coming giving you a simple answer. The reason it's this way is because of immigrants, because of the Democrats that are giving all the money to somebody else instead of you, to some foreigner in the Ukraine, without explaining to you, you need to defend democracy in Western Europe, and that's what that cemetery in your town and that monument in the middle of the town is for, and why you maybe didn't know your grandfather, and why your grandmother or great-grandmother worked in a factory like a hero around the clock to build the industry, to build the ships and planes and boats where a bunch of young men in this country just coming out of the Depression, who hadn't even, probably most of them had 3 hot meals in their lifetime, signed up and you know, and participated in the greatest sort of military effort our world has ever known with a good moral cause, right? To liberate people that were being targeted and oppressed by a madman, right? But Trump won't explain it like that. He'll say, just like the madman did back then, it's this guy, it's the other that are pulling the strings. It's a George Soros, right? He'll use anti-Semitism, which is on the rise 1,000%, which is completely horrific. You know, we've gone so far backwards in such a short period of time, it should scare people because you're at the brink of real disorder and chaos. So he looks at those towns, right? You see all of that decay, and you see people in the town that doesn't look like it did 30, 40 years ago. And if you're not hip and you're not smart and you don't have a big world view and you're coming out of a culture that's reinforcing this kind of messaging, you're going to be like, yeah, okay, maybe it is their fault. Maybe that's why it's all like this now. Maybe it's because the Dems and these open borders are taking all of our, you know, jobs away and all of our, you know, public, you know, funds and all this kind of stuff, which is bullshit. It's not true at all. Those people are coming and doing jobs that you either don't want to do or there's not enough of you to do. I mean, they're working their asses off, you know, and they're taking care of their families here and abroad. Go into a community that has, you know, a lot of people coming from Latin America, you know, Mexico and stuff. They're families. You go drive through there on a Sunday. What are you going to see? Picnics, you know, quinceañera, whatever you call it, you know, birthday parties. Like, they're family people, little kids in dresses and nice outfits going to church on Sunday. They're everything the right aspires to be. Family-oriented, hardworking, like religious people. They're into the guy that you pretend to be into a lot more than you are when I'm talking about Catholicism, right? The most loyal Catholics in the world, you know, besides the Italians or Latin Americans. And there's Trump yucking it up on the dais with Cardinal Dolan last week, you know, talking like, not just like a Philistine, like an asshole, calling his opponent a scumbag, cursing, you know, making homophobic remarks, making transgender remarks, a convicted sexual predator, a convicted business fraud in the city that these top Catholics are patting themselves on the back for raising funds for Catholic charities. They're inviting this guy to talk. I know I'm going off on a tangent, but that pisses me off, right? Because they're using religion and they're not understanding what spirituality is. They're not looking at the people, you know, who are actually practicing the religion in a humble way. They're looking towards the asshole with the power and saying, we're going to put our stamp of approval on you. I wrote about this in Noel's Notes on Substack. Please sign up if you're not reading it. It's free to sign up. All you need is an email. But my grandmother has a long history with Catholic charities. She opened a homeless shelter in Peekskill, New York in the late 80s because we had a big homeless problem, unhoused people problem back then too, and somebody came up on a train from the city and froze to death on the streets of Peekskill when I was in high school, and my grandmother wasn't going to stand for it. So she opened a shelter which still operates today. And at the time, a Catholic, George Pataki, who's from a very prominent family in Westchester, who went on to become governor, he was the county executive at the time, and he didn't want to let my grandmother and Catholic Charities open this shelter. And they bought a warehouse down by the river and wanted to do this because he didn't want to admit there was people sleeping on the streets in Westchester, because Westchester's a predominantly affluent, you know, county, and it's seen as a luxury product. And he didn't want to admit that they had, you know, a problem, that people were coming up from the city, you know, or couldn't afford the rents and stuff. He wanted to ignore it, like typical Republican thing, you know, pretend like it didn't exist and protect the leafy white suburbs from the inner city scourge, right? My grandma said, F you, opened it up anyway, made it happen, okay? She never sat on the dais at the Al Smith dinner, right? My great aunt, who's a Catholic nun, you know, with Catholic charities, who spent all kinds of time in South America. My grandparents, who helped build schools and wells and all kinds of things in Haiti, and had decades-long relationships with Catholics in Haiti who would come up and stay at their house. And, you know, they had a lot of interchange between their parishes. You know, those are those are good people. Those are Catholics. Those are religious people that are humbly doing the work of the Lord and taking care of a problem and loving their neighbors. You know, that's what it's about. And all religions will point you in that direction if you study the core of it, right? But then these guys get powerful and they get institutions, and especially one like the Catholic Church, which obviously has so much of its own, you know, malfeasance to answer for, right? And abuse of power and stuff. Is literally on the same day that Cardinal Dolan was laughing with Donald Trump, the LA Archdiocese of the Catholic Church had to spend, you know, some, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars payout for decades of covering up, you know, sexual abuse from priests, which we all know, you know, happens and has been happening for hundreds of years in the Catholic Church. So, and all, you know, all over the place. But, and I know my podcast is all over the place, but my point is, you got a guy who's using religion. He's getting the people, the sort of fake religious, in it for the money guys going along with this. You know, they're all slapping each other on the back at a big fundraiser. And you got Trump campaigning on outright hate and violence. And believe me, he'll allow violence to happen. Like that's what'll happen if it gets to that point. So how do we prevent that? We got to show up in numbers that are huge, okay? And you might think everybody's already out there voting in the states where it's beginning, and they are. They're standing in line and they're posting on Facebook that they did that. Good. Keep doing that. Keep the momentum and the enthusiasm going. You don't want to be somebody who missed out on this election. You don't want to sit on the sidelines. I know there's not a lot of young people that listen to this podcast, you know, but if you hear it, you know, if your mom's listening to it or somebody else and you're 18, you better vote. It matters. Okay. This isn't one to sit out. And I know it's frustrating, and I know we can feel powerless. And in many ways, we're well on our way to being powerless, but we still have the power, right? Because we have a democracy that's functioning. You elect that guy, we don't have a democracy anymore. It changes overnight. It's not hyperbole. He may not announce that it changed overnight, but when he takes power, if he can somehow put himself in there, you know, and worst case scenario is he wins outright, you know, the Electoral College on that night, you know, on Tuesday, on November 5th. That would be a redux, you know, a repeat of 2016. It would be horrible. And I'll be sitting in the same room with the same look of shock on my face. And we don't want it, as we all will, right? News anchors will be crying. It'll be the same thing, but it'll be worse because he'll be unfettered this time. He won't even have the like, oh, maybe he'll be normal when he gets there and he'll get normal people to help him and rein him in. That ain't happening. He's going to be hanging the people who reined him in last time. And he's going to have Stephen Miller and, you know, J.D. Vance and all these other assholes in charge, you know, and the full sort of strategy of the Heritage Foundation and Project 2025. They already vetted like 20,000 people as hires for the 50,000 that was their goal. They want to fire 50,000 federal employees and replace them with Trump loyalists. That's a nightmare scenario in and of itself that most people haven't gamed out or thought about. You don't really think about what the USDA does, you know, in the course of managing a nation, but it does a lot. All of those departments do. Interior Department, like you name it, HHS, they'll go in and gut those things. And this is beyond him inviting in Elon Musk to trim the fat of the government. You know, and what that'll be is Elon just cutting everything, not knowing what he's doing, and putting it all in a fund that Trump has some connection to, because Trump's been talking. He wants this sovereign wealth fund. Why don't we have a wealth fund? Because we don't have a surplus, because you fucking Republicans blow all the money every time you get in office. The only time we've had a surplus in my lifetime was Bill Clinton, right? And Bush, you know, W blew it, you know, within a year. Who, by the way, hasn't endorsed, you know, Kamala Harris, and people are holding their breath. Don't hold your breath, for he's a Bush. Okay, come on. Let's be real. All right? But you can't let Trump get back in there. You can't let this happen. Like that's our power now, is that we can still prevent it. Okay? Because it won't just be Elon Musk shutting it down. It'll be all these anonymous tools that you've never met that are going to just, go into every agency and destroy everything. People forget Scott Pruitt and Ryan Zinke, and Dr. Carson and these guys. They were all out of their minds, and they were cabinet members. And they had to go in the first term, at least two of them, right? Zinke and Pruitt, because they were so corrupt, they were an embarrassment almost to Trump, right? Because there was still a modicum of normality left in D.C. That will all be gone. So somebody who's installed at that level, it'll be like more power to you. As long as you're kicking, the percentage up to the boss, do whatever you want in your department. And, it'll take decades before that damage gets undone, and it'll never get undone and fully accounted for because you won't have a democracy anymore. Trump won't answer to anybody, right? We'll all answer to him. And that's what dictators do. They're at the top. If you don't have loyalty to the boss, you don't exist. If you're in the press and you're writing critical, you go to jail or your newspaper gets shut down. You don't think Elon Musk and Trump and J.D. Vance will be as vindictive as possible towards the media that's basically gone pretty easy on him, but it doesn't matter. There's no loyalty. Trump attacks Fox News all the time, and he'll only spin out. He'll only get crazier because it'll become a sort of behind the scenes contest to see who has his ear, who can manipulate him, who could be close to him. That's the other thing, is that the surrounding circles, when you have that kind of black hole at the center, gets extra sketchy. You'll have Steve Bannon, who will probably inveigle himself once again right into the inner sanctum, who's, by the way, in jail not far from here. He's over in Danbury at the federal prison. I believe he's getting out any day. I can't do the math, but I think he had to turn himself in July, and I think it was a 4-month sentence. And I think that always struck me in my head, that timing is weird. I could be wrong, but he might be like, I'm back, and leading whatever chaos and overturn the election effort they're going to try to game out. Okay, so that's all doomsday stuff. I'm not trying to freak you out. I'm trying to say, hey, we can prevent it. We still have time. The first step in that is showing up to vote in huge numbers and winning Pennsylvania. We don't win Pennsylvania, it's a lot harder to pull any of this off. But we win Pennsylvania, we show up in huge numbers. Not just that this country knows that a lot of Democrats showed up and voted, that the world at large can see that. And if he claims power, the world at large can say there's no way he's the winner yet, okay? Because we haven't counted all the votes, So those are the things you can focus on. Those are the actions you can take. You can work phone banks. You can knock on doors. It's not too late. You can sort of try to reach hearts and minds. That's what I wrote about today on the Substack, was just, you got to do what you can do one day at a time. Every day counts. And it can be paralyzing, and it can be obviously anxiety ridden, infused with sort of danger, and it's all getting pumped up, and, God forbid it doesn't, go the way we think it's supposed to go on election night, that could also, that could be a very difficult time, right? Because it's not just about finger pointing, it's about the shock of what happened. And that all feeds into his narrative. So we have to sort of be on guard almost spiritually for what we're dealing with, because self-care is important, right? It's important to remember what we're fighting for. For me, I always think about all these kids that are going to suffer because of this chaos, because of these people that sort of lead with intolerance and bullying and cutting all the federal programs and school lunch programs and all these things that are just cruel. There's no other reason for it than just being cruel. And, to sort of wrap up what I was saying earlier in the show, that's a lot of his appeal. He appeals to guys who want to pull the wings off of butterflies, the guys who just step on a flower because everybody else is admiring it, right? There's something broken deeply in Trump's personality, and a lot of people were attracted to that, right? In perverse ways, because I think a lot of women sort of view him as this sort of protector guy, even though he's obviously a predator, because he's almost he dovetails with people's individual trauma in a way, and I don't think that's by accident. I think Putin had all kinds of psychological information on the demographics that Trump, targeted when I talked about micro-targeting last week, right? And that's in all demographics, right? Unfortunately, like abuse and all kinds of messed up things happen in people's lives and in their families and stuff. And if you can be like a jujitsu master and use people's pain against them in a way, right? To blame, like, that's why they also like have to deflect from Trump's obvious defects, right? Trump is a sexual predator, right? He is like a pedophile. He likes 12-year-old girls that look like his daughter. That's not hyperbole. He's a sick man, right? But what did they do in 2020? They would say, Biden's a pedo or whatever. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, Joe Biden's been in D.C. for 50 years. No one's ever said that before. You're saying it because your guy is, but you need to deflect with your audience. And you also know if you give a powerful, piece of rhetoric, like he's going to break up these child, sex trafficking rings that Hillary Clinton is running in pizza shops, it would sound crazy to most. But if you're somebody that would resonate with on an emotional level, it'll give you a sense of sort of redemption and empowerment that you'll then attach to that candidate, right? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in his audience, because you can look at the crowds of these, look at the crowd shots and you'll see all kinds of emotional investments that people have in this situation. There's just the meanness, the getting to boo the other, and the press, and the, the sort of like group calls for violence. I have no idea what Madison Square Garden is going to be like, and I'll do another episode next week to comment on it once we know. And that's the house that I worked in a gazillion times. That's like, it's personal. I did Pete Seeger's 90th birthday there. I did the reunion tour, more Springsteen shows than I can count, but 10 in a row. That's in the Live from New York City box set. I was the guy who brought Amadou Diallo's parents up to meet Springsteen. This is when he debuted 41 Shots, American Skin. This is a song about police violence. This is 2000. And, he debuted that song in Atlanta. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Sorry. So he debuts this song in Atlanta, right? And it makes the cover of the New York Post. Bruce comes out against the cops, right? And there was a case of a guy named Amadou Diallo, and he was murdered by a squad of cops that Giuliani had set up, and they would basically like drive around neighborhoods that had crime, neighborhoods that were just, predominantly black parts of town, Harlem and New York and Brooklyn, and Giuliani kind of just terrorized these neighborhoods. He'd get these like jacked up white cops, and they'd go into these neighborhoods and they'd mess with people. And I know that because my old roommate became NYPD in the early 90s. And he said my job was to like go beat up black people essentially. And I did an episode with him that's on YouTube. I don't know if it's still there, and he's not that way anymore. He worked on the pit and got, cancer, and he lives out in California now and grows dope. But I remember those years. I remember Giuliani coming in, and that was his idea of cleaning up the city, was picking on minorities and brutalizing people, and and messing with people's civil rights and murdering them in some cases. And that was the case of Amadou Diallo, Abner Louima. There was a lot of guys in that period that were just getting ground up by Giuliani's police, and Bratton and Kelly, who were the police commissioners under that. But anyway, so it was a bad scene, and Bruce, as he so often does, he finally wrote about it in the way only he can. And I hadn't even heard the song yet. He just played it. Is this too loud? He played it in Atlanta, which was the show right before he came to the Garden, and it made the newspaper, the New York Post. Trump disses cops or whatever. So the police, not the commissioner, but like the head of the union, I think it's the same Pat Lynch, who's still the head of the union, was like, boycott Springsteen, right? So when they showed up to do this concert in New York, and I was hired to be like the backstage runner because they were making a film out of it with Jonathan Demme, and I love Bruce, so it was my first opportunity, really working with him and getting a paycheck, and I was thrilled, you know. And when I show up the first morning, they had implemented this extra security level because he'd already gotten so many like threats and stuff. And during the concert itself, these cops would get drunk, and one of them ran up to the front of the stage and like threw his badge on the stage and gave Bruce a finger, and like, you know, all kinds of crazy shit was going down. And this was the cops, and the beef went on for years. Another time I was at a concert in Queens, and Dylan sat in with him, and Bruce had sort of arranged to have a police escort take him to a boat. He was going to hop in a boat, and that's how he was getting home. Because the easiest way out of Queens, right? And he did his rap from stage talking about the war and George W. Bush and stuff, and anti-war rap. And the cop got on the radio and said, "Stand down," and all these cops walked off the job, and it was chaos. So Bruce got stuck in the same gridlock as the fans, and that's what they would do. They're like a gang, okay? So they sort of declared a bit of a fatwa on Springsteen for this song that he wrote that was supposedly critical of the police, American Skin, 41 Shots. So when I finally hear the song is about both sides of the thing. It's not that he isn't judging the horrific, 41 shots. Is it a wallet? Is it a knife? I forget the lyrics exactly. Is it a gun? Is it a wallet? Because that was their excuse. He reached for something. He was reaching for his ID, and they shot him 41 times. So, or 41 shots were fired at him and hit him, obviously, a lot. So, he tells this song. It's just a story of what was happening in our city and in our country at large. The cop was scared. He's driving in from the suburbs. He's got a young wife. He's part of a culture, and he's part of a political philosophy that is demonizing other people. So he feels like he's the good guy. And that's part of what I'm trying to explain with this MAGA stuff. In these guys' minds, they're the good guys. And especially in the communities in New York, a lot of the people are going to be going to this rally. It's where cops and firemen live. That's where I grew up, in northern Westchester, Rockland, Long Island. If you guys are from these areas, you know what I'm talking about. So these guys, and they're good people one-on-one and in their lives and stuff. And they don't see the institutional and generational kind of lies they've been told, not only about, racial politics and law enforcement and culture, about, the things that they hold dearest to them, respect for the badge, the flag, the military, all these sort of things that on the surface there's nothing wrong with and should have, place of pride in civic American life, but have been manipulated by a con man who's like, I'm the only one who matters in this. I'm the only one who can be standing behind these 15 flags. I'm the one you should be saluting. I'm the one, that the badges protect, and that's what's dangerous, because that's not who we are as a people, and Bruce was like, exercising his free speech as an artist, as somebody that people want to hear from, and writing about the world he knew and the world he lived in. And Bruce is not like an anti-cop guy. Like, he's got security. He's from New Jersey. He's one of us too. But I saw how that sort of easily manipulated cultural thing, he's criticizing us, go off on him, has blown up into what Trumpism is. And there was a sort of a lesson in that for me that I see reflected in these current times, like these guys are turning their back on Springsteen. It's like, you don't like Springsteen? Like, you're lying. You know what I mean? You're from New York, dude. This music is good. Like, shut up, but that's how it is. Like, you go against the boss, everybody, not him, he's the boss. On that tour, I'll tell a lighter story. So Bruce is like my hero. I grew up listening to that. Jackson Browne and Springsteen were like my two guys. Jackson especially growing up, and Bruce was like the new guy, when Born to Run and stuff came out. And I have an uncle who was really into him, and I grew up listening to him. In high school, that was it, man. Nebraska, and I had a 12-string acoustic, and I would sing Johnny 99, and Bruce has always been like a teacher to me from afar, like Shakespeare or something, a simple man's Shakespeare. He was explaining my world to me as long as I was aware of my world, especially East Coast, growing up in Maryland, driving up through Baltimore and up through Jersey and stuff, looking out the car window, the back of some old 70s muscle car that my mom owned. She always had Dodge Dusters and Plymouth Furies and all these things, and the back seat would be full of beer cans and, cheeseburger wrappers and maps, old Texaco road maps. To borrow a line from Springsteen, he talks about wiping his fingers on a Texaco road map. Like, that's the 70s right there. That's a genius who writes that thing, So, I revered this guy. So I'm working on this tour, and, it's the first morning, and it's the end of the tour. I'm just the local guy there at the Garden, but we're going to be there for 10 shows, over the next 2 weeks. So I'm thrilled. So I'm like, well, there's plenty of time. When I meet him, I'm going to say something really cool, and, he'll like me and, view me as a fellow songwriter or something ridiculous, I was about probably 30, 29. And, so I got to know Nils Lofgren, who's one of my heroes, and all these other guys. And one day, I'm talking to Gary Talent, his bass player, asked me for like lemonade or something from catering. I went and got it for him and his kids or something. So I'm talking to him and I'm telling him how much I enjoyed his playing the night before and everything. And unbeknownst to me, Bruce had heard this and stepped out of his dressing room, to see who this kid was who was like complimenting the bass player, which maybe didn't happen that often, And I didn't see Bruce come out of his dressing room, and I set up the dressing room. That was part of the gig. I worked for the hospitality crew that he brought on the road and stuff. So I turn, and there's Bruce, like with his head cocked to the side, eating a tuna fish sandwich. And he goes, "How you doing?" And I go, "Hello, sir." And I just ran. I just said, "Hello, sir," and just turned around and ran away. I couldn't handle it. You know what I mean? So, like, his regular crew got word of that, wind of that, and kind of laughed at me for saying it. "Hello, sir." Like, what was I going to say, right? He wasn't the boss to me. I wasn't, chummy enough to be like that. And he's Bruce freaking Springsteen, Years later, when I was Jackson's road manager and his tour manager for a brief moment on this tour of Canada that he did with the crew and the production manager and me and him all on one bus, just one bus, the solo acoustic tour with like 50 guitars. And we went across Canada from Victoria to Newfoundland to St. John's. And that's when I met the Trailer Park Boys and became friends with those dudes. But anyway, and we had Jackson and the Trailer Park Boys sit in Halifax. But when we began that tour, I was extra nervous because I revered Jackson. He could be pretty kind of demanding and sort of difficult. You don't know your routine. I was taking care of, taking over for another guy. My previous tour with him, I was taking care of the band, which I preferred. I wanted to take care of the band and the sidemen and ride on the bus with him. Like, if you admire somebody and you have to do like what a tour manager, road manager has to do, it can be a pretty difficult task. And if you don't have a rhythm to it, it's just a fucking nightmare. So this was sort of that case. And I was calling Jackson the boss, "Hey, boss," because one of the guitar techs would always call him boss. And then one day Jackson took me aside and was like, "Hey, man, let's be honest, between you and me, the only guy named the boss lives in Jersey." Just call me Jackson. It was kind of funny. That was on Vancouver Island, which is where the Tragically Hip began their final tour, by the way, in that arena. I was just watching Long Time Running again the other day. If you haven't watched that and you watched the documentary on the Hip on my recommendation, then you got another treat waiting for you. And they did a film of the last tour. It's called Long Time Running. And it's pretty miraculous. But anyway, all right, guys. Well, that looks like I've been talking for a whole podcast. I know it was a little loose tonight, so I apologize. Did I finish up the Springsteen point with any kind of like meaning? It was just watching people get sort of worked up into a frenzy that denies who they really are, and then couple years later, 9/11 happens, and he writes The Rising, which is the best song written about what happened, and he's clearly like a friend to police and firemen, and, he's a good dude, and he's been to all these benefits, and he's playing, benefits for Kamala. I think he played tonight, actually, in Atlanta. And I'll tell you the stories of Bruce on Obama's inaugurations another time. I did the big concert on the Mall with him, which was the Sunday before President Obama got inaugurated. Some of you guys know a lot of those stories. And then I got to do the Super Bowl in Tampa right after that, which was talk about a big celebration, coming out of dark times into a period of hope. And that's what we need to head into now, right? That's what we can have. It was a good time when Obama got elected that first time. We turned a corner, and we need to do that again. And we get a lot of the same, echoes, right? You get your first female, woman president, Southeast Asian, African American, badass, earned the job, didn't get it through nepotism, not giving it back to a madman, and we can celebrate that. We can go out on the Mall and freeze our asses off and celebrate hope. And 2 weeks away, we can ensure that. So show up in numbers like never before. I'll come back before the election. I'll stop talking now. Thank you for listening. NoelCasler.com. If you need anything, sign up for Noel's Notes on Substack. If you listen on YouTube, I guess you're supposed to like it. You can also support it on YouTube or listen on Patreon, Noel Casler, for commercial free. So anyway, I'll shut up now. Thanks for listening. I love you guys. Be well. Talk to you soon. Peace.